Welcome, Fright Night Vault listeners. You've stepped into the silence again, and tonight's silence belongs to something that does not forgive. Subscribe to the Vault and never walk alone again. The town of Marrowick was ordinary in every way that mattered. Narrow streets lined with modest houses, yellowed street lamps that buzzed weakly against the night, and a single main road that wound past shuttered shops and a church whose bell had long ago gone quiet. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew one another by name, where curfews were for children, and where the darkness was trusted because nothing ever came out of it. But that changed when the crying began. At first, people dismissed it as wind dragging itself through loose gutters or stray cats wailing in alleyways. A faint sobbing heard late at night, thin, broken, and hollow. A voice carried low enough to unsettle, but never strong enough to track. Then came the whispers. Families spoke of hearing footsteps outside their windows, slow and deliberate, long after midnight. Mothers found their children awake, eyes glassy, whispering that someone had been calling their names in the dark. Fathers blamed nightmares. Children swore they weren't asleep. No one saw it at first, only the aftermath. A dog vanished from its leash. Scratches appeared on doors as if long fingernails had dragged across the wood. A trail of wet footprints, bare, cold, unexplainable, leading to the houses of those who had heard the cries. By morning, nothing remained but the unease. By nightfall, the cries would return. It was then the town learned the name it did not want to speak aloud. The Hollow Mourner. They said it was not a woman, not a man, not anything that had ever been alive. Its face was never the same, always blurred as though drowning in tears, a mask of grief shifting from one expression to another. It wandered the streets as if searching for something lost. Yet everyone who heard it felt that its search was not for what was gone, but for who was next. And when you heard its cry, low and heavy like a funeral dirge, the only choice was to pray you could ignore it. Because if you listened too long, your ears would bleed, your body would weaken, and you would find yourself walking into the night, unable to stop your own legs, walking toward it. The mourner had come to Marrowick, and with it came the first signs of fear. Marrowick had survived floods, fires, and the slow death of its factory years ago, but no calamity had ever silenced its streets the way the mourner did. It began with small disappearances. The Keller's dog was the first. One evening, its leash was found snapped, dragging along the wet pavement outside their home. Paw prints dotted the street, trailing only a few steps before stopping dead, as though the animal had been lifted into the air. By morning, the Kellers swore they heard scratching beneath the floorboards, and at night, the sobbing moved closer, pressing against their very walls. Then came the boy at the gas station. His name was Eli Carver. He worked nights, keeping the pumps open for travelers, though Marrowick rarely had many. When Eli's shift ended, his car was left running, headlights still cutting into the fog. But Eli himself was gone. His co-workers later whispered that he'd been heard crying softly to himself in the week before, as if a voice had been following him. His mother insisted she woke one night to hear him sobbing in perfect unison with another voice outside her window. The town could no longer explain it away. Something was here, and it had patience. Police tried to intervene. Patrol cars circled the streets after dusk, headlights burning into the mist. Yet officers returned shaken, reporting phantom weeping that slipped through their radios, voices whispering their own names in static. One officer swore he saw a figure in the rearview mirror of his cruiser, its face contorted with grief, its skin gray and stretched. But when he turned, the back seat was empty. Fear spread like infection. The grocery closed earlier. Bars stopped serving past 9. Doors were locked, blinds drawn, children kept home. Whispers of curfew swelled into something official, though no law was ever passed. Even the church reopened its bell tower, tolling midnight in trembling defiance. Still, the mourner pressed closer. Those marked by its presence awoke with blood on their pillows, the inner walls of their ears torn raw as though something had whispered directly into their skulls. Others woke to find wet handprints on the inside of their windows, pressed against the glass from within. Survivors began to gather stories like warnings. Don't follow the sound. Don't look at the face. Don't answer when it calls your name. And yet, the cries grew louder. People began to vanish. Not in crowds, not in spectacular scenes, always one by one. A worker missing from the night shift. A woman failing to return from her evening walk. A child slipping out of bed and never seen again. Marrowick learned that the mourner never struck in rage. It struck in grief, slowly, patiently, inevitably. Soon the town was split in two. Those who believed they were haunted and those who swore it was all hysteria. But every night the sobbing returned, threading its way through the alleys, bleeding through the walls of houses, rattling the nerves of anyone still awake enough to hear. By now, Marrowick knew one truth. The hollow mourner was not wandering aimlessly. It was choosing. And once chosen, no one lasted long. The night the town of Marrowick truly broke began like any other. Fog draped across the roads, lamps buzzing faintly, families whispering prayers they no longer believed in. But the mourner had grown bold. It came to the center of town. The sobbing was no longer drifting on the wind. It was everywhere. From the hollow church bell to the rusted swing sets, from windows to radios, the cry seeped into every corner, rattling bones and shattering sleep. People poured into the streets, terrified and sleepless, clutching rosaries, bats, and kitchen knives. Children clung to their parents, some bleeding from their ears. And then they saw it. The hollow mourner walked openly under the lamps of Main Street. Its figure was tall, impossibly thin, draped in a tattered shroud that seemed to weep with it. Where its face should have been was a shifting blur of agony. Sometimes the features of a lost child, sometimes an old woman, sometimes a man screaming, always dissolving, always reforming, as though grief itself could not decide what shape to wear. Every eye fixed on it, but those who stared too long collapsed, clutching their heads, blood spilling from their ears and noses. The creature's sorrow was not sound, it was weight, a pressure that broke the mind. Sheriff Halbrook tried to act. He raised his rifle, shouting for people to get back, and fired. The bullet passed through the mourner as if through smoke, clanging harmlessly into a storefront. The ghost turned its face toward him, shifting into the likeness of his late wife, and he fell to his knees, screaming her name. He never rose again. Panic erupted. People ran in every direction. Some dropped where they stood, convulsing, as if the sound of crying had burrowed straight into their skulls. Others were dragged into alleys by unseen hands, their screams swallowed by the night. The mourner did not rush. It moved with a deliberate slowness, head tilting toward anyone who dared make eye contact, its blurred features reshaping themselves into the faces of their own lost loved ones. Every victim dropped into madness before being taken. Survivors who tried to flee spoke of the thing following without moving. They swore that no matter how many streets they turned down, no matter how many locked doors they slammed behind them, the weeping was always just outside, closer than before. One group of townsfolk gathered in the church, clutching candles as the bell tolled frantically above them. Yet when the bell fell silent, they realized it was not silence at all. The weeping was inside with them. The candles flickered, the air grew damp, and one by one they vanished, their cries joining the mourners in a choir of grief. That night, the Order of Marrowick collapsed. Police abandoned patrols. Families locked themselves in basements. No one trusted the streets. No one trusted the dark. And still, the sobbing went on, unbroken, until the sky began to gray with dawn. The mourner had shown itself in full, and what the town learned was worse than death. It was not hunting randomly. It was learning. It was choosing. It was remembering faces. And once it remembered yours, there was no escape. Mourning in Marrowick brought no peace. The streets were littered with signs of the night's collapse. Abandoned shoes, doors ripped from hinges, blood smears leading into alleys with no return. Families who had barricaded themselves indoors found their neighbors missing, their friends' houses empty, their town hollowed, and yet the mourner was gone. Not defeated, not destroyed, simply gone. Its sobbing had faded with the rising sun, leaving behind a silence too sharp to be trusted. Survivors stumbled out of their homes, eyes bloodshot, ears bandaged, whispers trembling on their lips. Some swore they still heard it, low and distant, like grief waiting just beyond the horizon. The sheriff's badge was found lying in the gutter. The church doors stood wide open, pews overturned, candles melted into puddles on the stone floor. Of the dozens who had fled there, not a soul remained. The town began to change. Windows were boarded, streets emptied at dusk. Families gathered in basements with radios switched off, lights dimmed, ears pressed against pillows to block out the night. Whispers of rituals surfaced, salt lines across thresholds, bells hung in windows, old hymns scratched into door frames. No one agreed on what worked, but everyone believed something had to. They did not speak the mourner's name aloud anymore. Instead, they called it the cry in the fog. And whenever the weeping began again, faint but certain, no one dared step outside. Those who survived bore scars they could not hide. Some deafened themselves, jamming cotton into their ears until the drums ruptured, preferring silence to hearing the cry again. Others were marked with strange bruises along their throats, as if unseen hands had held them while they slept. And more than a few wandered the streets in daylight, murmuring apologies to people no one else could see. The hollow mourner was not gone. It had simply been sated for now, waiting, adapting, listening for the next name to call. And when the night fell again, the people of Marrowick knew the truth in their bones. It still hungers. Welcome, Fright Night Vault listeners. You've heard the cries that broke a town. Subscribe to the vault and never walk alone again. Listen in the dark. Watch with the lights off. If you ever hear weeping outside your window, do not answer. We upload daily, and one night the story may be yours.